On this Saturday night, another Israel attack in Gaza sparks international outrage. One of the few hospitals left standing, besieged. How Israel is defending the raid, with Gaza's humanitarian situation already at rock bottom.
We continue to call for an immediate ceasefire.
More pressure on the Prime Minister to resign. The latest Liberal MP to publicly call on Justin Trudeau to call it quits. Plus, what sparked this major fire in BC at one of North America's biggest coal facilities? And not a fan of what you got for Christmas?
That belongs in a museum.
The exhibit dedicated to your bad gifts.
Global National, reporting tonight, Ann Gaviola.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The World Health Organization says it is appalled by an Israeli raid that closed the last major functioning health facility in northern Gaza and left its director under arrest. The Kamal Adwan Hospital is now said to be empty after hundreds of patients and healthcare workers were forced out. The IDF claims to have been targeting Hamas militants, but the operation is garnering international condemnation as it exacerbates a dire humanitarian situation in the region. Bianca Facchinei has tonight's top story.
The last major hospital left in northern Gaza, now out of service after Israeli forces tore through it Friday. One patient recalls the early morning raid and says he didn't know what to do or where to go.
They were shooting through the windows. There were artillery shells by the gates.
The Israeli military raided Kamal Adwan Hospital, referring to it as a Hamas command center. Staff were forcibly evacuated, and some patients were moved to the nearby Indonesian hospital. However, doctors claim the other hospital isn't equipped to provide care due to a lack of power and water.
They asked us to leave Kamal Adwan and head to Vancouver. The way there's no road, just deep sand. My father kept having to pull me out of the sand, piles of sand that is difficult to walk in with an injury.
The World Health Organization, which says it was appalled by the raid, claims the hospital is now empty. An urgent mission by the organization to Indonesian Hospital is being planned for Sunday to safely move patients to southern Gaza for continued care. The United Nations also expressed alarm over the attack.
We continue to call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. We continue to call for the protection of all medical facilities in Gaza.
The Israel Defense Forces say over 240 Hamas, Islamic Jihad terrorists, and other operatives were apprehended in the raid, and claim some of them were posing as patients or used ambulances to flee the scene. The raid comes days after Israel launched airstrikes in the area, killing dozens of people. In a statement Friday, Gaza-based health authorities said the number of deaths since October 7, 2023 is now over 45,000, and the number of injured is over 100,000. Bianca Facchinei, Global News, Washington.
Israel says it has shot down a missile fired from Yemen just 2 days after the IDF struck several Yemeni targets, leaving at least 4 people dead. Sirens were triggered in Jerusalem and other parts of Israel today, the 6th such overnight attack on the center of the country in less than 2 weeks. Houthi forces have vowed to continue their attacks in the wake of Thursday's extensive Israeli airstrikes. Israel targeted Yemeni ports, power plants, and the country's international airport, where the Director General of the World Health Organization was about to depart.
There was a very heavy explosion, very close. It felt like actually he was just next to me. I was not sure actually I could survive because it was so close, few meters from where we were. To be honest, a slight deviation could have resulted in a direct hit.
The IDF said it was targeting Houthi military infrastructure at the airport. The Houthis claim only civilian facilities were hit. Russian President Vladimir Putin has made a rare public apology for Wednesday's deadly passenger plane crash that killed 38 people, but he stopped short of admitting Russia had anything to do with it. In a statement, the Kremlin says Putin directly apologized and offered condolences to Azerbaijan's president on the phone for the tragic incident. It only notes that Russian air defenses were operating in the area the plane repeatedly tried to land in before it diverted to Kazakhstan. There's been mounting evidence suggesting the plane was fired upon, including damage to the fuselage that aligns with missile fire. Back here in Canada, the pressure isn't letting up on Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, with yet another voice within his own party demanding his resignation. Calgary Liberal MP George Chahal has joined public calls for change, publishing a letter that doesn't mince words about how he's had enough of Trudeau's leadership. Mackenzie Gray joins us now from Ottawa. Mackenzie, what's Chahal saying?
Well, he is absolutely eviscerating the Prime Minister, Anne, in a letter Chahal sent to his caucus colleagues that he is now sharing publicly. Any rational individual in a position of leadership would resign, Chahal said. Any group of individuals providing advice based on data and logic would reach the same conclusion. Unfortunately, a small cabal have decided to pursue a reckless strategy of mutually assured political destruction, leading to one of the most pointed calls from a Liberal parliamentarian yet. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau no longer has the support of caucus, and to maintain some dignity, he should immediately tender his resignation. The Prime Minister is said to be reflecting on his political future while vacationing in BC, but Chahal doesn't want to wait for Trudeau, writing to the Liberal Party president, saying, "I would urge the Liberal Party of Canada board to immediately plan for a leadership race, regardless of the Prime Minister's formal resignation." The current Liberal Party constitution says a leadership race must be a minimum of 90 days, time the party might not have, Anne, with an election that could be forced by the opposition within months.
Now, we are heading for a federal election with polls showing most Canadians now favor casting a ballot early in 2025. Could this topple the Liberals?
Well, it certainly could, Anne, and that's what the Conservatives are hoping for, with their plan to bring a non-confidence motion at the committee level in early January to try and bring the government down. And the NDP are saying they will vote with the Conservatives, which would be the first time post-supply and confidence agreement that the NDP wouldn't back the Liberals. But the New Democrats seem to think it might not actually lead to an election.
150.
Referencing back to this vote in 2005, despite losing a non-confidence motion in the House of Commons brought forward from a committee, Paul Martin's Liberals deemed they didn't actually need to ask for an election, and his government continued. Now, the Conservatives had told Global News they plan to structure this motion to make sure the government will fall, but none of this might actually matter, Anne, if the Prime Minister quits. In that scenario, he's likely to prorogue Parliament, shutting down the Commons to allow for a leadership race, meaning votes like this and any other confidence motions could actually be months away.
Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thank you. And just south of Vancouver, a major fire broke out this morning at a coal terminal in Delta. Flames tore through a coal stacker at the facility, which is North America's largest coal export terminal. Global's Julia Foy is at Delta Port. Julia, what do we know about what happened?
Well, it's back to business here at Delta Port, but it was a very different story around 8:30 this morning. That's when black plumes of smoke could be seen in the nearby town of Tawasin. The fire department was called in, and a coal stacker, which was moving coal onto ships ready for export out to Asia, caught on fire. A number of fire crews came to the area and fought the fire for several hours. At this point, we're told there were no injuries, and it's unclear how much damage was done at the scene. Now, this is the largest coal export port in all of Canada, and it's estimated that 36 million tons passes through this port every year. Anne?
Julia Foy in Delta Port, thank you. And a cargo ship from Cyprus is still stuck in the St. Lawrence River near Montreal. It's been trapped since Christmas Eve due to a power failure. Attempts to refloat the boat on Friday failed. It will remain stalled in the river until at least tomorrow. Generators, heaters, and other supplies have been delivered to the 20 people on board the ship. And millions of people across the U.S. South are under tornado watches. Several smaller tornadoes had touched down by midday, and the threat has increased throughout the afternoon. Forecasters are calling it a particularly dangerous situation with the potential for large, long-track tornadoes in parts of Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas. death at the hands of police. Coming up, the calls from Indigenous leaders for a national inquiry into police-involved deaths after a deadly 2024. Plus, the modern-day arms race, my interview with the head of a nonpartisan think tank on why Canada can't afford to sit on its laurels with artificial intelligence. A spate of deaths after interactions with police late this past summer had Indigenous leaders wrap up the year calling for more investment in First Nations police and a national inquiry into racism that First Nations, Inuit and Métis people face when dealing with law enforcement. But as Melissa Ridgen reports, Indigenous leaders fear the issue will get lost in the chaos of a troubled Liberal government and impending federal election.
A mother's heartbreak. I am shattered. I am broken. When is this ever going to stop? My son didn't deserve that. Her son, John Wells, was a champion steer wrestler and member of the Blood Tribe. Now, a statistic. One of 9 Indigenous people killed in dealings with police from late August to mid-September, including 15-year-old Haas Lightning, who was gunned down by RCMP in Wetaskiwin, Alberta, after calling 911 for help.
This is colonialism and systemic racism that continues to persist under consecutive governments. First Nations, Métis, and Inuit have the solutions to end this violence.
That was question period on September 17th. Later that night,
officers responded to reports of a man causing a disturbance.
Police encountered Wells, and soon after, he was dead.
This is a tragic situation, obviously.
After viewing body cam and hotel security footage, Alberta's police watchdog challenged the police narrative, saying Wells was never told he was being arrested. He was tackled, tased, and a spit mask was put on him. Then, while handcuffed face down on the ground, he was sedated by paramedics, and minutes later, he was dead.
As national chief, you try and work on reconciliation and you try and work on all these efforts to make things better in this country. But when you see things like that happen over and over and over again, it sets back our relationship.
Even before the spate of deaths, Woodhouse-Nepenak lobbied Ottawa for First Nations police. And earlier this month, Assembly of First Nations chiefs passed an emergency resolution calling for a national inquiry into the broader issue of racism in policing.
The AFN says despite 20 inquiries and commissions into police and the justice system, little action's been taken, and Indigenous people continue to die at the hands of police at a higher rate than other Canadians. While only 5% of the population is Indigenous, they make up 16% of police-involved deaths.
The lack of accountability and the lack of change is devastating.
Woodhouse-Nepenak fears 2025 could be another year with too little progress.
I thought we were moving towards a good path on that. But of course, there's chaos in the House of Commons, and that can slow things down. And that worries me. Like, all these things get slowed down during an election process.
Melissa Ridgen, Global News, Winnipeg.
Ahead, just as the internet changed the way that we live, artificial intelligence is set to disrupt everything too. How prepared is Canada for what's to come? Canada ranks 14th on Stanford University's Global Artificial Intelligence Index, which examines research and development, adoption, and commercialization. Now, many say Canadian policymakers need to do more to ensure the country doesn't fall behind in what some describe as the new arms race. I recently interviewed Paul Sampson, president of the Centre for International Governance Innovation. I started by asking if Canada is ready for the AI revolution.
It is a big deal for sure, both the good and the bad, right? There's both. On the good side, there's all kinds of things happening across sectors, medical sectors, agriculture, drug discovery, energy, all those things, like tons there, opportunities for companies. On the negative side, we know that there can be biases built into algorithms. We know that there can be manipulation, deep fakes, even weapons systems being controlled by AI or bioweapons and things. So there's a whole bunch of issues on the table, both good and bad. This is going to be a huge deal for Canada. I would say an analogy is interesting here. When you think back to when automobiles were really picking up, about over 100 years ago, new technology starting to appear everywhere. You needed roads that were both new markets, but also investment from governments. You needed rules around those roads. Were there speed limits? Were there seatbelts? It was a huge opportunity, and it transformed lots of things. AI is that on steroids.
On steroids. That's interesting. This whole special is about the business of AI, and I wonder, is Canada going to be able to commercialize on what we have as a very deep bench when it comes to AI research, but can we monetize that?
Right, so that's the big challenge for Canada in a lot of areas, and it will be the same in AI. And we're great on the R&D side. We've got tons of researchers, good university system, entrepreneurs that start out, good startups, but they don't scale. What happens? Do they move to Silicon Valley? Yes, a lot of them do, right? Or are they not able to scale up? So how do we crack that? I'd say there's two things. One is we're not going to be able to outspend the US or China on AI. We won't. So we'll have to outsmart them on strategy, right? And if we zoom in on certain areas where Canada has a strategic advantage, like energy, agriculture, mining, maybe healthcare, probably responsible AI, that we're doing this with some regulations or guardrails around it, that it's not just a free-for-all market. We could establish a competitive edge there and then allow those companies to scale up globally.
It sounds a little bit to me like you're talking about a global arms race. Is that essentially what this is?
Well, there is actually a global arms race element to this, right? I didn't mention military so far, but the use of AI in autonomous drones and other weapons is a whole other discussion, and that is one of the huge issues that does require global cooperation. But on the economic side, there's also a bit of an arms race. Now, the reality is that China and the US are so far ahead of everyone else on the core computing power that they can use to train new models and really large systems, that we have to come in strategically. And so therefore it is very, very competitive between us, say Japan, Europe, to carve out that middle space there and be a global player.
Are we ready for the disruption that AI presents when it comes to the labor market and jobs? That's probably the number one question that I get asked.
Sure. People are always worried about the jobs. There will be an impact on jobs. When you look back in history on how did the technology impact the job market, it's usually a question of the transition. You've got some disruption, but then you've got new jobs that are being created. In this case, there's a worry about those jobs being forever gone. So there's one group that says that. Personally, I think there will always be new jobs created doing different things. So it's really about that transition. So the government needs to be very focused on training. I think we can do a lot more in Canada about, college training, short programs of training people in AI that wouldn't necessarily mean a full computer science degree. Those are good too. And then transition, how does government help people that would lose their job, move into new areas? But I don't believe that there's a net loss of jobs over time necessarily.
I want you to look into your crystal ball, and because there's been more awareness of all things AI this year, so think of it as the awareness year, do you think that 2025 will be the year of mass adoption, where it is ubiquitous?
So let's call them the techno-optimists, are very much of the view is that it's probably 2025, right? That we'll blast off with that many more competitors to ChatGPT. China will come out with some, others may come out with some, and it'll really blast off and we'll get adoption. You have to have adoption in more of a mainstream way than you have now. It's moving faster outside of Canada. Canada's ranked right now 14th on the global AI index that Stanford University does, 14th in the world, which is not surprising to me when you look at R&D, adoption, commercialization, all those things. So we're not moving as quickly as some, and I think that's going to be the key issue. I don't think 2025 is going to be the biggest year of all. It'll just be more of the same.
And you can watch my full interview with Paul Sampson on our website, globalnews.ca/globalnational. Next, when bad and bizarre gifts become art, proof that one person's trash can become another's treasure. As the holidays wrap up, many of you may be left with a gift that you just don't want, and you're not alone. In fact, a Toronto pop-up is taking those bad gifts and turning them into a one-of-a-kind exhibit. Lexi Benedict takes us into the Museum of Unwanted Gifts.
So I was maybe 4 or something like that, and I hated peas so much, like more than anything else in the entire universe. And my uncle got me just a can of peas.
So the worst gift I ever received was a It's like this big statue of a clown.
There's now a place in Toronto to celebrate and display all of these unwanted and so-called bad gifts.
You know, it's a mix of tacky, silly, or things that seem perfectly fine to some people, and maybe, you know, to other people, they're irked by these things, and so they're here on display. Bad gifts are a little different for everyone. There's an explanation to go along with the bad gifts.
The museum is home to over 20 gifts, from quirky to inappropriate.
Oh, this is a very unique gift from Colombia, which you can tell by the colors on the strap. It's a carafe made from a horse's hoof.
You can expect to see a wide range of unexpected gifts, from fossilized dinosaur poop to my personal favorite, this bag of cat nails.
This area is where people can come in and bring their bad gifts and improve on them, or they can add to the collaborative bad gift sculpture.
It's an interactive experience. Visitors are encouraged to not only see the bad gifts, but improve and draw their own.
It's a little bit triggering when I see some things. I'm like, I can picture the family member that would have done that.
And if there's a gift that catches your eye, some are up for auction, with proceeds going to the Daily Bread Food Bank.
This is a bag of cat nails. Did you hear that gasp from over there? I can't believe it either.
And there's an auction sticker.
Yes, it's up for auction.
The museum wraps up January 5th, but the hope is that this gives people ideas for what to bring next year. Lexi Benedict, Global News.
Still don't understand the cat nail clippings. That is Global National for this Saturday. I'm Ann Gaviola. Tonight's Your Canada is the Golden Ears in Maple Ridge, British Columbia. We love seeing your Canada. Please keep emailing your photos to globalnational@globalnews.ca. Thank you for watching. I hope you will join us again tomorrow night. Have a great evening.